representing their best self with the right leaders and the right friends and helpers along their side. I'm also super excited to be presenting our guest speaker tonight, Minjun. She's easily one of the most friendliest, easygoing, and talented designers I've met. So I'll let her introduce a little bit more about herself, and then we'll jump in. So I'm gonna stop sharing right now.
Yeah, so I will share my screen and talk about today's topics. So let me share my screen. Can all of you see my keynote here? Okay, cool. So hi everyone, my name is Minjun, so here is my today's topic: how to give and receive design feedback from your team. So this is the topic I feel like it's really difficult for me to do this kind of like receive or get feedback exercise when I was a junior designer. However, when I get more experience, I really just talk to a lot of designers and ask them the similar questions, and I got a lot of valuable learning from my mentorships, and as well as from my real work experience. So I'm happy to share what I learned from these topics. So one of the disclaimer I need to make at the very beginning is that so all of the perspective, thoughts, learning share on this slide is from my personal perspective. It doesn't representative for any of my employer. So let's jump into the agenda today. I will do a quick brief intro about myself, and then we will directly jump into the topic about how to receive feedback and get the feedback. And the rest of the time, we will have the Q&A sessions, so we can use this time to answer the question we have from all of you. So let's start with like who I am. So I graduated from University of Washington, Seattle, Human Computer Interaction Design program a couple years ago, right now, like 4 years ago. And after graduation, I started like working as a full-time product designer. So I actually began my career in Boston. So I was a product designer at a Boston-based startup company in College One, building the two-side marketplace for the high school students who are looking for the mentorship for the college application. So after the startup experience, I moved to a slightly larger company, Wayfair. So I was a product designer on their warehousing team, building the product for the warehouse employee to improve their working efficiency. So I did a lot of warehouse research and flew to Kentucky a lot monthly. And then I joined Amazon as a product designer, and primarily I was working on the Amazon Prime team, where I was working on lots of projects about how to help the member understanding different benefits and use our benefit in their daily life. So after Amazon, right now I am the product designer at Microsoft. Actually, I just joined Microsoft at the beginning of last month. So I'm currently working on the imaging and video search on the Bing. So I'm hoping that one day I can launch a product and you guys can see it's on the Microsoft Bing. And yes, and outside my words, I like Kitty a lot, and this is the picture of my cat. His name is Kirby. Yeah, and I just play around with him every day, and he's my boss actually. And yeah, and definitely I'm a foodie. I love food, and I always love to explore local restaurant and explore the local coffee shop with my friends. And I'm excited to explore the local foods in Vancouver, Canada. And then let's jump into today's topics. Actually, I want to talk about how to receive feedback first. However, before we go into tips and tricks for how do all of us as a designer to receive feedback, I want to talk a little bit about like what is the design review. So design review is a very typical exercise or meeting we are doing in our daily work as a designer working in any type of the company. So usually, like based on my work experience, I think the design review can be separate into two types of the design review. One is the design review with your own design team. So you will be chatting with the designer on your team, including your design manager. The second part is for the design review you are doing in a weekly basis will be in a review with your product team, product owner and the engineering team. They are the person who work closely with you for this kind of project you are working on. So by understanding what type of design review we have, we need to think about who is our audience. It is the designer or the engineer or the product manager, because the way how we present our words and then receive the feedback is always, you need to tailor your story about like who is the audience you're trying to communicate with. So based on what type of audience you're trying to present and receive the feedback from, you need to also think about what kind of context do they need to help them give you constructive and useful feedback. The other thing you need to keep in mind is what do they really care about? Are they care about like the visual alignment? Are they more care about the business impact or technical constraints? And be mindful that whenever you are presenting your design or during the review to looking for the feedback, always talk about what kind of feedback you are going to looking for in the very beginning. Because I saw, especially when your design work is still working in progress, you don't put much time on refining the visual. In this situation, you have to talk about it in the very beginning. So today's session, I'm looking for receiving the feedback on the overall user flow, while we are not dive deep into the visual treatment, the visual detail. So if you can talk about what kind of feedback you are looking for, you will get more useful, actionable feedback at the end. So here I will talk about the strategy of how to present the design work and receive the design work with your design team, with your fellow designer. So the first tips I have here is, because keep in mind, most of the designers working on your team, usually they are not working on the same project with you. So you are the only or solo designer working directly with your PM or engineer on that project. In this situation, always share about the project context in the very beginning. So I usually will have a one-page slide, which I will point out what is the key user problems, business goal, what kind of project stage I am, and what is the next step after this review. So in this situation, you can help the design team understand more about like what is the project background and overview, especially if you are a designer working on B2B, like warehousing or other very complicated like business facing design team. It is really crucial for you to introduce the project context to help people provide more actionable feedback on this project. And the second tips I was already mentioned earlier is ask people about the specific feedback you are looking for. Are you looking for the feedback on the overall like information hierarchy, or you are struggling with like some different visual indicator? You want people feedback on more likely on the visual side. So ask more specific feedback about it. And then if this is the design review with your PM and engineer, and I assume that you already have the weekly or daily check-in with them, especially with your PM, you guys probably know each other, especially the project really well. So in this situation, you don't have to repeat like what is the business goal, what is the user problem you're trying to solve for this project. However, what you are going to do in like before the meeting is you really need to set up a meeting agenda for this design review really well, and mapping out some key item you want to solve, you want to address or discuss during this meeting before you go into the design review with these people. And then make sure that before the meeting, if you have some relevant documents or anything you want people to looking at, feel free to send it out through the email before the design review. I usually will do it a week before I go into this weekly design review. And then when you are already in this design review at the beginnings, because you PM and you engineer probably already know about what this project is, what kind of product we are working on. So you don't have to talk about this project information anymore. However, you have to summarize quickly about what kind of problem you are trying to solve, especially like what kind of problem you're trying to solve is mainly from the next step you have from the last meeting you have. Because every time after we have the weekly design review with the PM and engineer, in the next week design review, we will presenting the design to address the problem or some next step we have from the last meeting. So it's really important to recap what kind of thing we are working on and what kind of problem we're trying to solve based on the last meeting, because most likely like PM engineer, they already forgot what is happening in our last session. So you have to do the job again to help people understand what we are going to working on and what we are going to review. And the other thing is when you are sharing your design work, always talk about the design recommendation with a strong rationale. What is the design recommendation here? What I mean is sometimes we might have a few different design inspiration to solve this specific problem. Based on my personal experience and how I learned from my performance review with my design manager, a lot of senior designers suggest me to only present like either one or two, most likely the most strong design you have, and suggest and present that only one design with the PM and engineer, and make sure that you talk about the design rationale, because this is the design review with the PM engineer, and you want to show that you already done the work and you have explored all these different solutions and you are the expert on the design, and you just show the one you want them to buy in during the design review, and also save the time. And what if you have other different design version you did, you can save it in the Figma file. Sometimes you might get some feedback about, have you tried blah blah direction? And then this is the time you can switch to that exploration you already done and talk about, yeah, I already did that design. However, I don't think that part worked really well because of blah blah reason. So in this situation, you can show that you already explored different directions, and whenever they ask you question or whenever they give you the feedback, you already prepare something to show. So in this situation, you can show that you are the designer, you are a very thoughtful designer that consider everything for this project. So make sure that show one most strongest design recommendations with the strong design rationale. And the other thing is, like what we are mentioned earlier, is what these people care about, especially for the PM and the engineer. PM always care about like success metric, business impact. So if you are justify your design rationale, you can talk more about how this design can improve like user retention or any like use a business metric this PM is caring about. And for engineer, they are more care about the feasibility, or have you ever leveraging the existing design system into your design decision, and what kind of technical limitation they have. based on the design work you did. So so I think this provides perspective. Think about what kind of perspective they have, what kind of thing they are care about. You can talk about the thing they are care about in design rationale. And then, so after I talk about like how you present your design work, it is the time for us to like receive the feedback from like designer, PM, or engineer. So this is kind of like my feeling I had when I was a junior. Like, oh, every time I jump into design review, I always feel like they give me tons of the feedback, and I don't know how to respond to this feedback. Especially some feedback is really it's really hard to respond actually. So here's some strategy and tips I summarize based on my personal experience. So firstly, whenever people share you the feedback, give you the feedback, you should always respond it with like more likely a positive tone. And what that means, I always say that is a great question. This is a great perspective. So always show you respect to others' feedbacks when you respond to any kind of feedback you have. And then the second is, I think this kind of ask question, this works really well with the PM and engineer team, because a lot of time, maybe your colleague, they don't know about how to give constructive or actionable feedback to other. So it is the time for you to ask them question. A lot of time I will just ask, what is the reason for us to use this copy other than this copy? What is the reason for you to suggesting us to use this kind of icon instead of other? So trying to ask questions, trying to ask what is the why behind the scenes based on the feedback you receive from these people. And then sometimes I think this happening a lot actually during my review. Sometimes when people like talk about the feedback or discuss the feedback, we might spend more time talking about other things other than the design works you are showing here. So it is a good reminder as a like design facilitator to talk with the entire audience that we don't have enough time to dive deep into this topic. We go back to the agenda because we still have like two items to discuss, haven't been discussed yet. So that is the reason I want all of us to prepare agendas before the meetings. So if the conversation is out of control, sometimes you can use the agenda to make sure that we will cover all these kind of items during this meeting. However, something that is out of control, we can tell our partner, we can tell the PM, we can find another time to talk about that topic, maybe offline, or we can schedule another meeting to do it. And the other thing is about summarizations. So every time when you receive a feedback and you also know about what is the reason behind the things, it is the time for you to summarize what is the key decisions we made from these conversations. Because a lot of time as a designer, especially working on a bigger team, you always need to make sure that your partner, your cross-functional team are aligned with everything during the meeting. So practicing how to summarize the key decision from the meeting, and also make sure that you capture what is the open question we haven't addressed during this meeting, and also talk about the next step. So usually I will do these summarizations at the end of the meeting, maybe 2 or 3 at the end of like last 2 or 3 minutes during the meeting. And the other bonus point is you can also send out the email to the entire team who joined this design review, and just list out what is the key design decision, what is the open question, and what is the next step. Make sure you also call out who from your team is responsible for this next step, because sometimes the next step is not about, or it's not only for your responsibility, some of your teammates might be taken a part of the next step. So here I can just using a simple example to talk about how I leverage the framework to receive and respond this design feedback. So here is maybe a design feedback you got from the PM. They say, I don't like this red color. I think that the blue color will work better in this situation. So when you first time when you get this feedback, I will always say like, thank you so much for your feedback. And could you tell me more about the reason for us to using the blue color instead of the red one? So thanks for your feedback. It's kind of showing the respect to others' feedbacks, and then ask people why, ask people question and reason for the feedback they are given, especially for a lot of people, they don't know about how to give you the right feedback. So it's a great strategy to ask them the reason. And then they will respond, they will provide more detailed reason. They say like, because the red color looks really weird with other color, and it seems, and it looks like it is not accessible enough on our device. So there's a typo, I should say accessible, not accessible. And the other, so based on their response, here is my answer. So I will say that is a great perspective. So from the visual design point of view, as well as the accessibility reason, you recommend us to try different color directions. So here the strategy I'm using is still recognize like people feedback with respect, and then summarize it in a more higher level perspective. While I'm not sometimes not make agreements on using the red or blue color, because as a designer, I need to explore and play around with different direction or treatment, and then we can nail on these directions. So I always just will summarize it in a more higher level and provide the next step for us to explore, to try. So here is the part for how we receive the feedback from the designer, PM, and other partner. And then the second session we have is how we can give the feedback to others during this kind of design review. So I think this is the first tip I'm going to share. Is still a similar strategy I have, is always talk about which part works really well in their design. So you need to show like you are really just looking at people works with more like with the caring mindset. So you really like the part they are working on, and then you can talk about what doesn't work really well in their design. It's kind of using the sandwich like strategy to talk about good, bad, this kind of thing. And then the second tips I have is always deliver your feedback with empathy and respect, because people usually will become more are more likely to accept if you talk about what things work really well, and then you talk about the potential direction they can explore next. And if you can talk about your feedback with empathy and respect, they are more likely to hear your perspective, hear different, to accept different perspective from other people. So think about like from the human-centered design point, how we can deliver our messaging with empathy is really crucial. And then the third tip I have is when you give feedback to others, always talk about your perspectives and talk about your perspective with the design rationale. I think no matter when you presenting your design work or when you show your design feedback to other people design work, it is a good time for us to do some training on our design muscle, how we can better practice, justify the design with the rationale. So the rationale could come in from what is the user problem we can solve from this design perspective, and how we can improve the business metric, and what kind of technical difficulty we're trying to address from this design work. So you can think about the design rationale from user, business, and technical perspective to make this rationale much more stronger. And then I always talk about so I always end up with my feedback with some open-ended question, because this is actually something I wanted to explore. However, I rephrase my sentence into more likely the open-ended question, because in this way, you are not saying that you have to try this direction. Instead of saying like this way, you will say, what do you think of blah blah direction? How about blah blah direction? Have you ever tried blah blah direction? So in this way, you're trying to just like make it more easier for your for the people to accept your feedback. So I think like here is the time I can share some specific example about how I give feedback to other people's works. So this is a really bad example. Like sometimes you might hear from other design review, some people say, I really don't like this blue button. So in this situation, you don't provide any value to the people who are presenting the work. You are not provide any constructive or actionable feedback to them. Instead of saying like this way, the strategy I'm using here is, again, always start with something works really well in their design work. So I will always talk about like, thank you so much for sharing your design work. I like it a lot. And especially I like how you explore the solutions across different platforms, like mobile, desktop, and TV. And then when I talk about something doesn't work really well, I will say, I'm not quite sure about this blue button work well with other component on this screen. And then I will say, how about trying different visual treatment to call out these primary actions? So I ask this kind of more likely the open-ended questions. It's more about my suggestion or recommendation to other people's works. So it's more likely for them to accept my feedback when I talk in this kind of way. And then in the end of this presentation, I just want to say, always keep in mind, feedback is a gift. Especially, I know a lot of junior designer, they might feel really not really comfortable when anyone share the feedback to them. But feedback is really a gift to help you to grow in your design journey. So because the feedback we receive from these people really makes us a better designer. And keep in mind, a lot of feedback you receive from your design review is not about you yourself, it's more about the project. They want us to collaborate and work well on this project and make this project better other than yourself. So just keep in mind, just you need to just separate from like work and personal life in this kind of situation. And then this is the sentence I keep in mind for a long time, because when I was a junior at Wayfair, I really fear of showing any design reputation, or I really just I wasn't really confident to talk about my design work and respond to other people's feedback, especially with this business stakeholder and engineer. So this is a sentence my manager told me, that no one in this room knows better about the design than you. So whenever people trying to questioning about something, or they trying to give you some harsh feedback, you need to have the confidence to respond to these people and talk about what you think, what is your design rationale. So it's more about like, you need to have this kind of strong like mental muscle to help you self like build up the credibility as a designer. Yeah, so thank you so much for listening to today's session. And yeah, and happy Lunar New Year's. So I haven't drawn anything for Lunar New Year, but happy Lunar New Year to everyone. And I'm happy to answer any question you have around this topic. Yeah, I know this is a very complicated topic. We can have a lot of different session around it, but today I just want to just provide some of the most useful tip you can apply quickly to your daily job as a designer to receive and get feedback from the design review. Thanks.
Thank you, Minjun. I think that this was an absolutely awesome slide deck to discuss such a complicated topic, as you said. And I believe everyone in this meeting also felt that way. So we do have some questions. Let's jump into some Q&A. So Linda says, do you ever experience imposter syndrome during or after these reviews? Do you have any tips to overcome imposter syndrome?
Wow, that's really a great question. Yeah, I feel like I do have, especially that 3 or 4 years ago when I just joined the company. First things, so I think it also depends on like your personal experience. The first thing I did was I always ask for feedback after the meeting from the senior designer or the design manager who joined this design review with me. Especially my design manager know about how to present my design work and how to respond to feedback is kind of an opportunity areas I want to improve. So she made some time to join the meeting with me so she can observe how I present and respond to feedback during the meeting. So firstly, I always ask for feedback after meeting with my design manager. And then because my design manager did a really great job delivering the messaging, she always talk about what I was good at during this design review, what I already improved based on the last observation she did. So this kind of small encouragement or small improvement really just helped me build a lot of confidence as a designer. And then because I am the kind of person who are open to the feedback, so every time after she shares something work really well, and she also talk about what thing I can working on better, what I can improve, and then I will just keep improving that areas. So I feel like this is the first thing I did. The second thing is just practice, especially if you push yourself, just join a lot of design review or you're presenting your design work with different audience, you will become more comfortable with presenting your design works and talk about the design rationale with the confidence. And the third one is just be kind to yourself, because I feel like this is a normal situation for all of the designer. No one will feel confident all the time, because we all have this kind of like downtime or the moments we are not very confident to ourselves. It's just very normal. So just accept it and working on looking at what is your strength. However, like working on the opportunity areas, working on your weakness, so you can become a more rounded designer. Yeah. So this is my answer.
Yeah, I think that those were all really great tips. And another thing that I'll add that can be really helpful to combat imposter syndrome after these design reviews is to remember that you're not married to a design. So you being and your value of a UX designer is not contingent on if someone likes a design or not. Those are two separate things. And I think as you grow in your career and you learn how to separate your value as a human being, as a designer, from the design opinions that you need to receive in order to improve, you'll learn how to kind of put those into two different compartments in your brain. Okay, like somebody doesn't like this blue button, but that does not mean that I am a bad designer. So I think it's something that happens over time too, as designers grow and learn how to separate the information when they receive it. Awesome. Okay, so we have another question. Okay, Mackenzie says, when receiving feedback from developers or engineers, how do we defend design choices that we feel strongly about? It's something I'm worried about as a design student, since most of the people I've met in tech so far are software engineers. Very good question, Mackenzie.
Yeah, very good question. So firstly, I will always talk about from the user perspective, how this design solution solve the user problems, how this design solution benefits user, because this is our expertise. So we need to talk about like how it works better for the user first. And then the second is depending on like whether you are leveraging the existing design system. So if you already apply the current design system into this solution, which is good, you can mention it. So I don't create any new component or customized component yet for these solutions. It's always from our like design system. In this situation, like the engineer, they know about, they don't have to build something new for this solution. Most likely they will agree on this direction. And the second part will become more complicated. Sometimes because of some certain constraints, we have to maybe designing a customized component, and the engineer will spend more time to build it. In this situation, like it becomes more complicated because sometimes because of time and the resource constraint, they don't have time to build on the customized component first. In this situation, this is the discussion you should have with the engineer and the PM. Usually, like what we did is, as a designer, I might explore other directions using the existing design system, and then talk about like what we are going to launch as a MVP versions. Usually, the one using the existing design system, we're going to the MVP, and then the second, that more likely the customized component, they will be built after we launch the MVP. And the other possible way you can do is, maybe when you are looking at this customized component, think about is there any other team on your company, other design team on the company, they can also leverage this new component to their product. If you find the possibility for other team to apply this component to their product, most likely you can go to the office hour with the company-wide design system team and talk about the proposal, because it works based on my personal experience. So I create a proposal about how this customized component works across different product domain, and I chat with the design team. And even though we were using the MVP version for the existing component for our MVP version, however, during that time, the design system team was building that component I was designing for. And then after they released that component, my engineering team, they can update the old component into the new one based on the design system team, what they built from the design system team. And the third one is, the third approach I also did was, sometimes I might do some quick A/B testing on different solutions. Like one is easy to build, one is more likely the customer component, and trying to get more user feedback on these different directions. So when I talk with the engineer and PM next time, I can have more stronger design rationale because I did get the feedback from the user. Yeah, so I hope this answers your question. It's a very great question. It's a very complicated, like situations, yeah, everyone will have.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And the other thing is that I'm learning that developers are going to have a totally different view of the design. So they're going to look at it from a technical constraints point of view. So their opinions are just as valid. And it's so important to take into consideration what they're saying, especially earlier on, because you don't want to design something that they are absolutely unsure about, and that they're telling you like, we can't build this, or this doesn't fit the use case. So all of their feedback is kind of rounded in with all of the other visual feedback that you receive.
Mhm.
Okay, so Cassandra asked, how do you prioritize the feedback that you receive? I think that's another great question.
Yeah. So, so how do I prioritize the feedback? I think it's also depending on the stage of project I'm working on. So if this is still at the very beginning of the project and I still in the design exploration phase, I might focusing on the design feedback that trying to help me focusing on like the higher level, like customer journeys, information hierarchy, while this kind of more likely the small like visual treatment exploration might, this kind of feedback might be later on, because we need to adjust the high level picture first and then dive deep into the detail. And the second is also the how to prioritize design feedback is also going back to what kind of problem we are trying to solve for this design exploration. If this is something that is out of scope, we might not taking this feedback right now, because sometimes when we have such conversation, we will know about, okay, this is, even though this is a great feedback, however, for these versions, we might not have the resource to take it into the consideration, but we can document it and yeah, and just document it, and we can talk about it later. So it's really depending on like the phase of the design work and the overall project timeline you have. Because if you are already in this kind of conversation with PM engineer, you will know about what is the more important feedback than others. Yeah, it's really depending on the situation of the project we're working on.
Absolutely. So we can have one more question, and I think we also want to take a group photo. So the last question is, and we've received it quite a bit, how often should a UX team have design reviews? And can one session consist of multiple reviews, or is it best to stick to one project per session?
So yeah, this is also another great question. I think for the design review you have with the entire design team, usually this is the design manager or the senior designer who are taking the responsibility to schedule this kind of regular design review with the entire team. Usually the design manager is taking this kind of responsibility. And based on my experience, we have weekly design review with the entire design team. So to make sure that we have the chance to catch up with other designer, and we kind of know about like what is going on your end, on other people's like project. So this is the design review with your design team. The second is the design review with the PM engineer. And I also, like, based on my experience, I always schedule the weekly design review with these people, which definitely will invite the PM and the engineer lead. Usually the engineering lead or tech lead, they will join that meeting. Sometimes we might have invite other stakeholders. So during this kind of design review, usually it will be like 30 minutes or an hour, usually in the 30-minute design review with these people. So we will just go through one project, typically with the PM engineer. And again, for the design review with your design team, usually each designer will only present one projects. If this is a session you are looking for the feedback from others, because especially when you have the conversation with PM engineers, sometimes the feedback session might take longer time than you expected, even you just presenting a part of the work from one of your project. Yeah, so I will recommend just focusing on one project. And if you have the separate project or second larger project, maybe this is a time for you to think about you should schedule a separate meeting for another. Because based on my experience, I usually working on different projects with different product manager. So in these situations, I will have separate weekly design review with different PM for my project. And most likely that we will be focusing on one most important project for each of our design review. Yeah.
And just to add on to what you said, you can also always seek feedback and review from other designers on your team, especially if they're in other parts of the organization. It helps to get some unbiased feedback from other people who are also visually like working on something different, but are also UX designers as well. And you can always make time for feedback. You don't have to wait for someone to approach you to get feedback.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, because right now, like, especially if you are the junior designer, that is a great time for you to ask more senior designer people to help. And you can schedule the one-on-one with them to focusing specifically on some of the design feedback you are looking for. Yeah, and sometimes we also using like Slack or other like tools along. I just to take a screenshot of the part of the design I'm looking for the feedback and ask people feedback during the channel. Yeah.
Definitely. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much, Minjun. We're going to be taking a group photo. So Minjun, if you could close screen sharing so that I can get as many pages of photos as possible. Okay, so we're in gallery view. All right,